Few would have ever thought a boy born in a remote village at Luba Mission in Chinsali would go on to become Zambia's first president and one of Africa's great leaders. Few, too, would have ever imagined that the boy born in the same year when the British South Africa Company relinquished power to the colonial office in Britain would be the one to spearhead the fight against colonial rule and eventually succeed in ending it. Kenneth David Kaunda was born on April 28, 1924, from David Julizia Kaunda and Helen Nyamo Nyirenda. His full names are Kenneth David Buchizia Mtepa Kaunda. He was the last born of 8 children, with 5 surviving into adulthood. Kaunda was given the name Buchizia, meaning the unexpected one, for he was born in the 20th year of the marriage of his parents. Kaunda spent his childhood days at Luba Mission, a place founded by his father who opened the Bemba land to Christianity. It was at Luba that the young Kenneth Kaunda started his education and learned how to write and read. Kaunda was only 8 when his father died from a bout of pneumonia. He was the last child his father David saw and blessed before his death. Kaunda almost stopped school after his father's death. School authorities could not allow him back because his mother failed to raise 2 and 6 pence or half a crown. Ironically, this was a school his late father had established. This sad experience was to influence Kaunda's decision to have free education for all children once he took office in 1964. Although Kaunda initially regarded himself as a Chinsali man, his horizon was widened when he went to Munali in Lusaka, the only secondary school for black boys then, which was opened in 1939. It was at Munali where Kaunda interacted with other boys from Northern Province and became more aware of the political situation in the country. Kaunda was to return to Luba in 1943 to teach after completing his 2 grades, Standard 7 and 8, at Munali. It was during his days at Luba, after Munali, that Kaunda and his friends, who included Simon Mwansaka Pwepwe and John Malamasokoni, became politically active. Kaunda recalls that in the company of his friends, who were teachers and members of Chinsali District Welfare Society, they would stage silent protests against colonial authorities who visited the area through the way they dressed. Kaunda and his friends later left Luba in search of employment in Mbeya, Tanzania, before proceeding to Salisbury, Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. But these international job hunts for Kaunda weren't successful, and he had to return home. Kaunda recalls that fighting for the rights of Zambians started a long time ago, with a few Zambians selected to sit on the Legislative Council and speak on behalf of Africans. The first Executive Council and Legislative Councils were set up immediately after the introduction of direct colonial office rule, but the Legislative Council comprised European settlers only, with no Africans. It was only after 1944 that things began to change when the Kitwe African Society, led by Mbekustele Wanika, issued the Kitwe Resolution, which among many things protested against the inappropriate and inadequate representation of African interests in the legislature. The society called for African interests to be represented by Africans elected by Africans. In 1948, the Northern Rhodesia African Congress, which was a forerunner to the African National Congress, ANC, was founded, with Mbekustele Wanika as first President General, with the first slogans, unity in teamwork, and one man, one vote. Dr. Kaunda recalls that his role and that of other young people then was more advisory to the African members of the Advisory Council. At the time the Northern Rhodesia African Congress was founded out of the Federation of Welfare Societies, Kaunda was teaching in Mufulira, but by then he had already made up his mind to dedicate himself to the independence struggle. He left his employment as a teacher and returned to Chinsali. Upon arrival, he engaged in activities that raised high level of political awareness, not only in Chinsali but the rest of Northern Province as well. In 1952, Harry Mwanga Nkumbula was to take over as second President General of the Northern Rhodesia African National Congress and transformed its name to African National Congress. The election of the firebrand Harry, who was fresh from Makerere University, raised the freedom struggle to another level. With his excellent organization abilities, which many had noticed, Kaunda was elected as Secretary General of the African National Congress, ANC, at a party congress held in 1953. The years that followed were active years of political mobilization and organization, and it was not long before Kaunda was arrested together with his president R.I.P. for being in possession of what colonialists termed subversive materials. Kaunda's political life changed dramatically starting in 1958. The Congress nationalist movement, which had been held together for 10 years, split with the formation of the Zambia African National Congress, ZANC, the forerunner of the United National Independence Party, UNIP. The split was among other issues over differences between the militants who wanted a boycott and the moderates who accepted to participate in elections based on the less than democratic 1958 constitution. All in all, Nkumbula was accused by mainly the youngsters of taking a casual approach to the struggle. ZANC was, however, not destined to live long. The party had become so militant, vibrant, and aggressive in their mobilization and organization against colonial rule. Its leaders were perceived as radical troublemakers. The party was banned, with its leaders arrested and jailed for 9 months in various parts of the country. The white settlers mocked the ZANC members with a phrase they termed Zafelatu, meaning ZANC was dead and dead for good. The campaign by Kaunda's group had 2 major results. First, the British government modified the federation policy and eventually agreed to discard it. And secondly, and most importantly, the imprisonment of Kaunda and other militant leaders elevated them to the status of national heroes in the eyes of the people. Thus, from 1960 on, the nationwide support of Zambia's independence movement was secured, as was too the dominant status of Kenneth Kaunda. Kaunda came out of prison together with other ZANC leaders in 1960, and after 4 months he was elected president of UNIP, the United National Independence Party formed by Mainza Chona and Paul Kalichini while Keke was in prison. UNIP under Kaunda was to push the independence struggle further into an aggressive drive and adopted what they called passive non-violent action, a form of civil disobedience against the federation policy. This was the Cha-Cha-Cha period. It was a period of heated speeches, aggressive campaigns, and clashes. It was during this period that Mrs. Linda Burton, a white settler, was burnt to death near Ndola. Kaunda went into reflections and published 2 books, Black Government together with Colin Morris, and later Zambia Shall Be Free. In 1963, the road to independence started lighting up. Following an election under which the ANC and UNIP later went into a pact, a coalition government was formed with UNIP securing 14 seats, ANC 7, while the UFP held 16 seats. Kaunda, known to some then as Mr. UNIP, entered the Legislative and Executive Council for the first time as Minister of Local Government. As for ANC, Mr. Harry Nkumbula, who had earlier been a member of the Legislative Council, became Minister of African Education. In much of his work, Kaunda was guided by the philosophy of humanism, which put a human being at the center of everything.
We are speaking of 2 lines of evil in the society of man today. One, exploitative international capital, with its offshoots of imperialism, colonialism, neo-colonialism, Zionism, fascism, racism, and apartheid. On one hand. On the other hand, you have poverty and its offshoots of hunger, ignorance, disease, crime, corruption, and above all, exploitation of man by man.
But events, mainly international, were to shatter Kaunda's mainly socialist policies aimed at national development. In 1973, the massive increase in the price of oil was followed by a slump in copper prices in 1975, and a serious reduction in export earnings. This resulted in Zambia having a massive balance of payments crisis and debt to the International Monetary Fund, IMF. It also derailed further development plans that pushed for major investment in infrastructure and manufacturing. With the economic situation becoming almost unbearable, in the late 1980s, agitation for multi-party system of governance was equally gaining ground. Public discontent against Kaunda's government was growing, and a drastic government economic austerity plan did not help matters. It had instead provoked a wave of unrest. This situation indirectly begged for intervention, and a group of economists, businessmen, lawyers, and many others from various walks of life gathered at Garden House Motel in Lusaka in July 1990 to look at a multi-party option. The Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, MMD, was born. It immediately gained ground and was assuming influence and authority with each passing day. Dr. Kaunda eventually gave in to calls for a multi-party democracy. He announced the bold decision during the opening of a National Council meeting of his United National Independence Party, UNIP. Here, he proposed constitutional amendments to restore multi-party democracy and parliamentary and presidential elections by October 1991. In effect, Dr. Kaunda had agreed to cut short his rule by 2 years and call early elections, a feat many describe to date as unprecedented on the continent. At a time when one-party states were common and when many leaders had a strong grip on governments, few would have expected KK, as he was fondly known, to cut down his reign. He had also decided the nation would not have a referendum because he did not want to divide the people. Was it a question of confidence or just facing reality, or indeed a decision guided by the need to safeguard peace? October 31, 1991, Zambia held its first multi-party elections for parliament and the presidency since the 1960s. MMD's candidate, Frederick Chiluba, won the presidential election over Kenneth Kaunda with 81% of the vote.
I, Frederick Jacob Chiluba, having been constitutionally elected to the office of President of the Republic of Zambia.
To add the MMD landslide in the parliamentary elections, the MMD won 125 of the 150 elected seats and UNIP the remaining 25. After leaving office, Dr. Kaunda had a rough time trying to settle. He had no house and was to be accommodated at a mine guest house where he was later evicted by the Dr. Frederick Chiluba government. KK stepped down as UNIP leader in 1992. However, he returned to active politics in 1995 with the party sidelining Kebim Sokotwane, who had assumed the leadership of UNIP. His return was, however, not a smooth one. KK was barred from contesting the presidency in the 1996 general elections by a change in the constitution. He was later arrested on Christmas Day in 1997 on allegations of concealing knowledge of an attempted coup that happened in October that same year. To Kaunda, it was unthinkable that he could be linked to a coup plot when he had advocated non-violence all his life. He started a hunger strike to push government to release him and to protest his innocence. As part of the protest, Dr. Kaunda also stopped shaving. The arrest was not the end of his political problems. In 1999, a court ruled that KK should be stripped of his citizenship because his parents were from Malawi. KK mounted a legal challenge and his citizenship was restored. In 2000, KK finally bowed out of active politics and diverted his energies to the fight against HIV and AIDS and to the Kenneth Kaunda Children's Foundation. Although the international community recognized KK's role with various awards, in Zambia, Kaunda's integrity was to be fully restored almost 12 years after he left office by President Levi Mwanawasa.
Whereby you have selflessly dedicated your whole life to the liberation of Africa with space.
He was decorated with the medal known as Order of the Eagle of Zambia, First Division, for his eminent role as statesman. To date, KK stands out as Zambia's colossus, as an international statesman, pan-Africanist, nationalist, national president, a strong family man with strong family values. Kaunda is a lover of sport, particularly golf and football. KK looks back at his long and distinguished life and public service and can afford to sing his favorite song, "The Lord is My Shepherd."
to